Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome to Lifelong Learning. Can you hear me in the back? No? Yes? Got thumbs up. Thank you. I'm Donna Faust, the club president. Please take a minute to silence your phones. As you can see, our members enjoy many benefits of club membership. Our very talented video team records every presentation, which is then posted on our website. But you need to be a member to access it. So our treasurer's back there if you didn't sign up yet. Before I tell you about our exciting programs coming up, the association would like you to know that the views expressed in our presentations are those of the presenters and may not reflect the views of the association or our club leadership. So let's begin. I'd like to present our program director, Juanita Brown, who will introduce today's speaker.
I don't know that I need to introduce David Berman to anybody. I imagine most of you know who he is. He's omnipresent and full of information about almost everything and a delightful human being and my friend. Please welcome David Berman.
Thank you, Juanita. Can everybody hear me okay? I'll try to speak loudly and into the microphone. If I lapse at all, raise your hand and let me know. When we finish, I'm sure you'll have some questions, and I'm going to try to answer some and anticipate some along the way, and hopefully do a good job on that. And here's the first question. What makes David Berman think that he's competent to talk about this subject? And my answer, if I were asked that, would be the same one that I might have given if I were asked that about 17 or 18 months ago when I gave a talk on semiconductors. I didn't know much about the subject when I started. And I've always felt that if you see a story that deserves telling and you think you can put the pieces together, then most people, if they make the effort, would be able to do it. But especially, it's a challenge when I know that one of our club members is a retired general in the Israeli Defense Forces. And that's our friend Uri Ram, who I understand couldn't be here today because I think he's actually in Israel, I was told. He has family there. And I approached Uri and I asked him, would you like to collaborate with me or work with me on this story that I'm going to do? And what he said was it was not an area that he had any involvement in when he was serving in the IDF in Israel. And he kind of gave me the green light and he said, go for it. So that's what we're going to try to do today. What I want to do first is just refresh your memory of the incident itself by showing you a brief video. So we'll go to the first slide, and what I'd like you to do, let me get my little pointer out here. Okay. Let's see if that's working. This fellow right here in the lower left corner, light blue shirt, blue hat, watch him. And then watch the other people who are in the video and ask yourself, who got hurt? And this is going to run for less than a minute, so let's take a look at that. That was on September 17, 2024. One of the questions you might have is, did this have anything at all to do with the horrific Hamas attack and massacre that took place on October 7, 2023? The short answer to that is no. The two incidents, that attack and the exploding pages, were not directly related. The pager operation was not planned to be tied in with it, but of course over there in the Middle East, everything is tied in with everything. It's all one big mishmash. But this pager operation was completely independent, as I will explain, of the attack that happened the previous October 7th. This has been called, this is when they exploded. You can see by the markers on this map, the explosions took place all over Lebanon and a little bit in Syria. And it has been called a Trojan horse operation. And the reason is, and you know, I talked to a few people who think the story of the Trojan horse is true, is real, but it's just a myth. And you will find it in the Aeneid, where the story of the Trojan horse appears. And it gave rise to a popular slogan, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." And one way or another, the story is that it led to the fall of Troy and victory by the Greeks. And the similarity and the reason that people draw this analogy is a great irony. Hezbollah, which in Arabic stands for Party of God, bought the pages from Israel. Israel sold them the pages. However, they didn't just walk up to them and say, "We're Israelis, would you like to buy some pages?" And that's the story we were going to tell, is how those pages got into the hands of Hezbollah and how they were tricked into buying them prior to the explosion. What is it about the pages that made them so deadly and explode the way they did? And to know about that, we have to be aware of the explosive that was put into the pages. Anybody want to say that fast? Penterethyl tetranitrate, which everybody refers to as PETN for short. And in case there are any chemists in the audience, I put the chemical formula for it down at the bottom, but that is as technical as I promise you we're going to get during my talk. PETN is an explosive material. It's structurally very similar to nitroglycerin. While it is potentially detectable, it is very hard to do when it's disguised in a clever manner. And the reason is that it's not metallic. And you know how there are some things in the world that can be both good and bad. If you know someone or you're a person who has a cardiac problem, you might be taking nitroglycerin. But then when you turn it into an explosive, you're still working with a chemical formula that's very similar. And this, over the decades, has been a favorite explosive of terrorists. And the major reason is because it's so hard to detect. And one of the things you might recall is what happened on December 21st, 1988. Pan Am Flight 103 exploded over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing 270, including about 10 or 11 on the ground. PETN was the key explosive, along with another one called Semtex. and it was hidden in a cassette player that was in a suitcase that was loaded aboard the plane. And here is another example of someone who tried to use PETN. You may remember Richard Reed. Richard Reed was known as the shoe bomber. He was apprehended on December 22nd, 2001, when he failed to ignite the PETN explosive that was in his shoes on the plane where he was a passenger. And alert passengers on the plane and flight attendants detected the smell of smoke when the fuse would not ignite, and they subdued him. And just as a matter of side interest, Richard Reed is still alive, and he's serving life without parole in the Supermax prison in Colorado. So, for better or worse, he's still with us. The exploding pages were manufactured in Israel. In the beginning, it was not known where they were manufactured, but eventually the story has come out over the passing weeks and months. They were manufactured either by Israel's famed Mossad intelligence service or under Mossad's direction. Now let's take a look at how they were placed into the pages. This is a look at the battery pack of the pager. If you look on the left, you'll see here that there is a lithium battery cell on the top. The second half of it is on the bottom. The explosives were put in there in a sheet, and some type of detonation material that would ignite when a spark hit it was set to detonate the explosives. Then all of that was sandwiched together into one unit that was put into a plastic sleeve, and the plastic sleeve was then put into a metal shell, and the metal shell then went into the casing of the pager. And that is how they put the explosives into the pages. So now let's go back a little bit in time and examine how Israel decided to commence an operation that was designed to get the exploding pages into the hands of Hezbollah. In the year 2018, a Mossad intelligence officer drafted a plan to manufacture exploding pages. So this plan actually began to involve, I got water here, thank you. It actually began to evolve about 6 years before the actual detonation. The Mossad operative brought the proposal to her leadership and recommended they consider making these exploding pages. But the idea was rejected, not because they were not intrigued by the possibilities, but because they determined that the use of pages among Hezbollah people was not widespread enough at that point to justify embarking on this operation. Over the next few years, however, Israel's increasing ability to hack into cell phones led Hezbollah in Iran and their allies in Lebanon to be increasingly wary of using smartphones. And they were right, because Israel probably has the best capability in the world of monitoring when people are exchanging communications via devices like smartphones. there is a element of Israeli intelligence, and some people may have heard of, called Unit 8200. If you've never heard of it before, just go onto your computer at home and Google nothing more than Unit 8200, and you will find a wealth of information. They are a super secret part of the Israeli intelligence apparatus that many people do not know about. They don't share what they're doing. Their names are not necessarily known to people. And what they will do is they will seek out the smartest and most capable young men and women in their school system, starting when they're teenagers, and identify them as being capable of being trained to go into Israeli intelligence, specifically into Unit 8200. And that is why Israel has a vaunted capability in cybersecurity and developing all types of software and hardware to perform cybersecurity. And when they take a young person in and start to train them, the average time it takes before they're fully qualified to be part of Unit 8200 is about 4 years. So we have a lot of people who are in their early 20s who are part of this operation. And combine that with a network of spies that Israel had embedded throughout the Arab world. They were pretty much on top of everything that was going on. And the use of cell phones was a big part of it. So the Arabs, Hezbollah in particular, were very right in becoming wary of using cell phones to exchange information, because at any given time, Mossad knew where they were and what they were doing. So they now work to encourage their own leadership to start using pagers. And what you want to be aware of is the characteristics of a pager that make it special. I keep pushing the wrong device. So what are the attributes of a pager? They use radio frequencies, but they don't use Wi-Fi frequencies. They don't use the type of communications that a cell phone uses. The signals are one way. When you have a pager, when you have a pager and you receive messages from the sender, you can't reply. All you can do is act on the message. They don't connect to the internet in any way. They have long-lasting batteries. Very important when you have terrorists running around in the desert, right? Before mobile phones came into play, lots of people used pagers. Nowadays, they haven't disappeared because they're vital for use in hospitals, fire departments, first responders of all types. So there's still a market for pagers, but it's not what it used to be. Now, encouraged by the knowledge that Hezbollah was employing more pagers, Mossad finally began to develop a pager that could house enough explosives to make it a miniature bomb. This required designing a pager that was larger than the smaller size that was the industry standard. On the left is a typical pager. It weighs maybe about, it's not very heavy, maybe only about 3 ounces. When you think about it, there's not a lot of electronics inside of it because all it's doing is receiving messages. On the right is the size of the pager that Mossad developed. Pretty big thing, and not an easy sell when you're trying to get the enemy to buy a bigger pager. According to a retired Mossad agent who was interviewed on 60 Minutes toward the end of this past year, if you might have seen it, when he showed a prototype of the large pager to Benjamin Netanyahu and tried to sell it to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he was questioned by Netanyahu about the durability of the pager. And the agent said to him, "It's very durable, it's almost indestructible." So without saying a word, the story went, Netanyahu stood up from the table and threw the pager against a wall. Fortunately, this was a sample. It didn't have explosives in it. And damage was caused to the wall. The pager was completely intact. No damage to it whatsoever. But when they went forward, the director of Mossad, whose name is David Barnea, B-A-R-N-E-A, was very skeptical, and he was rather angry. He said, there's no way they're going to take a pager that big and start running around with it. It's simply too big. So the agent worked for about 2 weeks, back and forth, to convince him to give it a try, until finally they relented. In order to make sure that they had a good product, Mossad did a lot of testing. They created a dummy with a gloved hand that held a sample of the pager and that had the explosives in it. And they tested it by exploding them, because what they wanted to make sure of was not that it would kill people, but only injure them. And if possible, only injure the person who was holding the pager. And when Mossad people were asked about, why would you do this, when probably you could have put, the explosives that went into the pages were about 2 or 3 grams is all that were needed. And if anybody wants a point of reference, 1 ounce is about 28 grams. So it was not a lot of explosive. It was not designed specifically to kill people. And out of the 7,000 pages, the 5,000 pages that were distributed, and more than 3,000 that exploded, there were fewer than 40 people that actually died from it. And you might have also seen on the news that the day after the pager explosion, several thousand walkie-talkies exploded. And I'll talk a little about that, although that's not the main subject of the presentation today. Mossad also tested the ringtones to try to come up with a ringtone that had a sense of urgency to it. And then they ran tests to determine how long does it take between the time a person gets a signal on a pager and takes the pager and puts it in their hands and reacts to it. And they determined that the average time for that was 7 seconds. So they did very detailed studies on this to try to narrow it down to figure out how they would be the most effective. Now, you might recall when we started out and I showed you the short video of the explosives going off, and I asked you to take a look at who got hurt. The only person who got hurt in that first video clip was the guy with the pager. Everybody else walked or ran away uninjured. And when Mossad was asked, why did you do it that way, when you could have put in a little more explosive and you could have killed them, they said that wasn't our goal. Our goal was, first of all, to cause the kind of injuries that would disable them from being effective on the battlefield. But in addition, it was to put fear into them. It was to let them know what we're capable of doing. And finally, besides those 2 elements, it it was to let them know that we can come after them anywhere, at any time, at any place. And it put a strain on medical services. So when you're not killing someone, but you're wounding them, not only are you kind of taking them out of commission, but you're forcing the support network to busy itself, the hospitals, the ambulances, all the people who are involved with that. So they had multiple reasons for wanting to do that. If you look here, this is a picture of one of the Hezbollah people after he got injured in a pager explosion. And you see his two hands are bandaged. And the reason is that the way the pages were set up was that the recipient would get an encrypted message that looked like it was coming from Hezbollah leadership. But to read that message, they had to take the pager and use a thumb or finger on each hand to push a button on each side of the pager. And that allowed two hands to be injured, not one hand. So it was all part of a calculated plan to accomplish that. Now we get to the issue of how do we get these pages into the hands of Hezbollah? We've talked about how they were manufactured. We've talked about the explosives and what the effects were. But as I said earlier, you couldn't walk up and say, "Hi, I'm from Israel. Here's a pager. Will you buy this pager from me?" So then you get into one of the most important elements of spycraft anywhere in the world, and that is to create a false narrative, to create a facade, to create things that look like they're real, but they're not real, to convince people to buy your product. And we'll talk in some detail about how that was accomplished. And as one of the Mossad agents put it, talking about the operation, he said, when they go looking for something, if they don't find something, that is not good. So they had to set it up in a way that they would find things when they went to look for them that made it look that these things were real. In one way or another, the following countries were involved in this. When I label this tracing the trail, I don't mean that the trail automatically went right from top to bottom. I just put it in there to illustrate these are most of the countries that were involved in that trail. Taiwan, Hong Kong, Hungary, Bulgaria, Norway. Not necessarily countries that Hezbollah would say, oh, they're friends of Israel, we can't have any business with them. So the way it started was there was a legitimate company in Taiwan called Gold Apollo, one of the one or two leading manufacturers of pagers in the world. And they'd been in business for many years, headed by a Taiwanese entrepreneur named Xu Qingquan. And having lived on Taiwan for a couple of years, I think I got the name right. He had a saleswoman named Teresa Wu who worked for him. And she had relations with the Middle East countries because she had sold Gold Apollo's legitimate pages to them. And she had their trust. She left the company, I believe sometime in 2021, and she started her own company. But she kept the name of Apollo in the company. So it was called Apollo Systems HK, Apollo Systems Hong Kong, supposedly with an office in Taipei, Taiwan, and an office in Hong Kong. But no one could ever prove that any business was actually done out of those offices. At her urging, Gold Apollo agreed to license their pages through her to a Hungarian company called BAC Consulting, and to let BAC Consulting use Gold Apollo's trademark on its pages so that they would give it legitimacy. In exchange for that, Gold Apollo got a royalty on each of those pages that got shipped out and sold. Now remember, they had no knowledge, Gold Apollo had no knowledge that this operation was underway. They thought it was a legitimate business deal that was being made. A New York Times investigation revealed that BAC in Hungary was one of several shell companies that were part of an Israeli front. It was founded in 2022. It was listed. This is the president of Gold Apollo. He was interviewed the day after the explosion. He said, I didn't know anything about it. He never sold anything to anybody in the Middle East. So the sales were engineered out of BAC in Hungary, and then another company called Norta Global, Norta Global, was founded in early 2022, and you can see this all happened around the same time by a person named Rinson Jose, and we're going to talk about him in a minute. But what they did was they set up false advertising for these pages that were being actually made in Israel, but never showing as being shipped from Israel. They were marketed by a Hungarian company that had an arrangement with a Bulgarian company, and both of those countries have stated no pages were ever made in those countries, no pages were ever shipped from them or went in and out of them. But this was the cover that Mossad had established. This is an ad for the pager. It's fake. This ad was put out by Apollo Systems HK, the fake one set up by the former saleswoman for a Gold Apollo, and it describes the capabilities of the pager. They called it AR-924. There was no such pager in existence other than the one Mossad was making. But it was designed to convince people who came across it, oh, these pages are on the market, we've got to look into it. This is the building in Budapest that BAC Consulting was listed as operating out of. People who worked in the building said they never saw anybody from BAC Consulting. The local officials in Budapest said they never saw anybody there. It was registered to a Hungarian-Italian woman named Cristiana Bassoni Archidiacono. And she may have been one of the people who was a dupe, who was not part of the operation, but thought it was legitimate. And the reason I say that is, after this thing all blew up, she was still around. She didn't run away. She didn't hide. She could be found, and she talked to the media. But that is the building they operate out of. All it was a mail drop. You know that there are many countries, for instance, they set up business in places like the Cayman Islands and places like that that have lax tax laws. But if you go down and you look at the physical presence of what the address is, it could be a post office box, just an office where the mail comes. There's nothing going on there. They're just registered there. But it was designed to fool the terrorists, designed to fool Hezbollah. So now, we'll take a look at Rinson Jose, who was the fellow from Norta Global which apparently had a hand in actually getting the pages shipped. He is Indian, but he is a citizen of Norway. He formed his company, Nordic Global, also in the spring of 2022. And he was the only employee. Maybe you'll see a pattern there, the way they were starting all these shell companies up. And the day after the pages exploded, on September 17, he was at the time they exploded, he was attending a business conference in Boston. And within a day, reporters figured out where he was and tried to reach him. And he took a phone call. And as soon as the reporter identified himself, he hung up. After that, the phone number went out of service. But the government of Norway immediately began investigating. They wanted to know who was this guy who apparently was somehow in the chain of command. And what happened was, and this is more evidence of the facts that we're talking about, was the government of Israel prevailed upon the Biden administration to get him out of the U.S. immediately without going through normal check-in, showing your passport, doing anything. They spirited him out of the United States. And in an interview, a former Mossad agent was asked about him, and all he could say about Rinson Jose was, he's in a safe place. And what that tells you is he's probably in Israel. No one's heard of him since the day after the explosion. So now, there was still this campaign that was underway to convince Hezbollah to buy these pages. What I'm going to show you now is a video that is long gone from the internet. It was taken down almost immediately. This was a video promotion from Teresa Wu's company to try to market these pages to the intended audience. And we know now what that audience was. Well, I got to go back. Uh-oh. Let's see if that's working. I want this video to work. Okay. Fingers crossed. Looks like the real deal, doesn't it? Well, it was a real pager, but it was only for purposes of selling it to one buyer. And Teresa Wu, the salesperson, offered them at a discount and said, we have a new, more powerful pager. Even though it's bigger, it's more rugged, and the battery will last 85 days, and it has all these extra capabilities. And although she reduced the price a couple of times, she had to be careful to reduce it too low. Because then if you reduce it to the point where people become suspicious, there's something going on here. So she made it sound more like it's an upgrade to what you have, and it's a pretty good deal for you, and you want to get it. So then we go back to that other page that I jumped ahead by mistake. This is supposed to be the lithium-ion battery pack that went into the pager. That is a fake ad also. The only lithium-ion battery pack that went into the pager was the one made by Mossad. It says on it, made in China, but it wasn't. China had nothing to do with it. What they did in addition to create an aura of legitimacy was they posted false questions and answers on various message boards where someone would say, oh, I've heard about this pager, I've heard about this battery pack, is it really good? And then someone would say, oh yeah, I've seen it, I've worked with it, it's wonderful. All lies, all fake, because they wanted Hezbollah to think, oh, this is pretty good, I think we better get some. And that was all part of the subterfuge that they did. Mossad still had not made firm plans to get these pages into the hands of Hezbollah until they were given a gift in early 2023 when Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah realized that cell phones were a gateway to Israeli spying. And he urged his followers to pitch their smartphones in favor of pages. This is Hassan Nasrallah. That's a translation of part of his message. He said, and I'm quoting here, you ask me, where is the agent? I tell you that the phone in your hands, in your wife's hands, and in your children's hands is the agent. So because of that, they started to put their cell phones away, and what happened then was they purchased the 5,000 pages. Now, there are a few questions that might come to your mind, and before I take your questions, assuming you have them, I'll ask a few of them and answer them for you. What was significant about the timing of this event that happened on September 17, 2024? The reason is that through the monitoring of the conversations that were going on and through their eavesdropping, Mossad discovered that Hezbollah was planning to send some of the pages to Iran, where they would be disassembled, and that would have blown the whole operation. They would have found the explosives. Netanyahu found this out on September 11th, and so they hurriedly made plans, and they triggered the explosives on the 17th of September last year. The walkie-talkies that exploded the next day had been in the hands of Hezbollah for 10 years. Israel had indirectly provided them to Hezbollah 10 years earlier, and because a walkie-talkie is two-way, they were monitoring everything that the walkie-talkie users were doing. Along the way, in late 2023, they learned through their eavesdropping that a technician for Hezbollah was suspicious about the walkie-talkies. Within a few days, they took him out with a rocket, and they killed him. But they figured, if we've exploded these pages, we better detonate the walkie-talkies too, because they don't have... Imagine, with all that went into that, if those things had been discovered, the whole thing would have gone awry, and it would have been a wasted effort. So they detonated the walkie-talkies too. And you could say, why didn't they discover they were rigged? Why didn't they learn about it? Well, they tried. They ran the pages through airport scanners, expecting they might find something if there was a problem. And because of the nature of that explosive, the scanners do not detect it. That's why you had the explosion over Lockerbie. In addition, the batteries, because a large part of it had to be devoted to the explosives, did not have the lifespan that they were advertised to have. They weren't lasting 85 days. However, you get something, you buy a piece of electronics, says it's going to last this long, and then it doesn't last quite as long. You write it off as hyperbole. And you say, well, okay, I'm still getting good use out of it. So even though they weren't getting the 85 days of battery use, they brushed it off, and they figured, well, it's not a problem. We're not going to burrow into it and find out what's there. Finally, the question arises, after this happened, why have retired Mossad agents been talking about it in public? And there's several reasons for that, one of which would be my speculation. It was a one-time thing. They couldn't do it again. Once you've done a thing like that, when are you ever going to be able to pull that off again? So they knew it wasn't going to happen again. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, they wanted Hezbollah and their allies to have some fear. And it was said that after that explosion, Hezbollah was running around. They were afraid to turn on their air conditioners because they didn't know what Israel might have done with the air conditioning. They were so afraid. And another reason is, I think we all know from reading the news, Netanyahu has been under a lot of political pressure over the past few years. And I think they felt by talking about now that it probably didn't hurt to burnish his reputation a little bit, to talk about what they did, since it was never going to happen again. But when a Mossad agent was asked, well, what else do you have up your sleeve? He said, just wait. One day you'll find out. And that was the way they answered it. So I hope that I gave you a good picture of exactly how all this happened. And if you want now, I'll take some questions.
Thank you, David. Can you explain exactly how the explosions were triggered? Did Israel initiate the message to cause the explosion, or how exactly did that happen?
The message was sent by Mossad, apparently from within Lebanon, and it was composed in Arabic in a way that appeared to come from a high-ranking Hezbollah official. And as far as the explosive material is concerned, I have not been able to find anything that said exactly what it was, because there's any number of types of things that if you hit it with a spark, you can do it. But all I know is, from what I was able to find, is that when they pressed the two buttons on the pager, it triggered a spark. And the spark is what set it off.
David, I'm interested about the distribution, the purchasing agents on the Hezbollah side. Was it an embedded Mossad agent that bought these and distributed them? Because there had to be some way to distribute them from the original manufacturer through various countries to Hezbollah.
They appeared to originate from Norda Global, the Bulgarian company, although they were not directly shipped from Bulgaria. One of the things that suggests that they were involved was, played a major part in the pipeline, was the owner of Gold Apollo, who was getting a royalty on the sales, would occasionally receive a royalty check. And he said, I didn't realize there was a problem at the time that once in a while my checks were held up for investigation because they said it came from a bank in the Mideast. And that suggests that probably Israel was providing the money, and that Norda Global was then working closely with Teresa Wu's company, Apollo Systems HK, to receive them secretly from Israel and put them on ships.
Good morning. Have the Israelis determined what the lifetime use of this explosive is? For example, it could last 10 years or 50 years. If they have more things to come, have they given you an idea of when it loses its liability?
As far as the specific explosive PTN is concerned, I don't know. I think the lifetime, I don't know if I'd say it was infinite, but I'd say it's very long, because when you think about it, it was the similar explosive that was in the walkie-talkies. And the reason they were able to get those walkie-talkies indirectly to Hezbollah 10 years earlier was that a Japanese company that made the walkie-talkies stopped making them. But a lot of other companies made knockoffs of them that purported to be look the same, behave the same, and so Israel got into the mix, and that's when they decided to provide the walkie-talkies. Although it's a great question, which is how long does PETN explosive last in its unexploded state? Not be a chemist, I can't say for sure, but I think it's a very long time, and something I might want to look into and share the information. Also, I think it's worth noting the effect of this on subsequent Mideast developments. The pages went off. 10 days later, Hassan Nasrallah, whose picture I showed you, was assassinated in a massive bombing by Israel. They had learned that he was going to be moved from the bunker where he was hiding to a more secure bunker, and they decided they had to take him out. Also, they took out a number of other leaders in the days and weeks that followed. There was another high-ranking leader who had their eavesdropping picked up the fact that in addition to his wife, he had 4 mistresses. And he was worried about what to do about that, and he arranged for a cleric to let him marry the 4 mistresses over the telephone. And they got him too. And one of the things we know about Israel is they're very patient. If you think about how long it took to get Adolf Eichmann, if you think about how long it took to bring the assassins who committed the Munich Olympics murders, how long it took to get to them, they do it for as long as it takes. So the fact that this took a while is not surprising, but also this has led probably indirectly to what happened in Syria. That was a lightning strike that was over in a week from the time the rebels in Syria began advancing, because Hezbollah had been, I wouldn't say cut off at the neck, but it was close. A lot of their leadership had been removed by Israel after the pager bombings, and Iran was in disarray. And you could say that because of that, it was a major factor in what has happened since then in the Middle East. And who knows what will happen next.
More questions?
Thank you for your hard work in doing this.
Thank you.
What happened, is her name Miss Wu, the lady from Hong Kong? Was she ever any retribution to her?
The speculation is that she may also be in Israel because she's nowhere to be found. When they went to the offices they were supposed to have in Taipei and in Hong Kong, those offices were empty. And there may never have been any business done out of those offices. They were just listed as official addresses. So I think the story is not complete yet. I think in time, Rinson Jose may surface, Teresa Wu may surface, but they're gone right now.
Any other questions?
How many people, how many of the leaders of Hezbollah were injured in this process? And did all of these explosives go off? And were there any civilians killed?
The last death count was 39, which included some from the walkie-talkies. It wasn't necessarily the leaders of Hezbollah who were injured in the pager blast. It was the operatives of Hezbollah. And although Israel has taken out a number of leaders since that date, I couldn't give you the exact number because it's an ongoing thing that could happen at any moment. But their main goal was not to use the pager operation against the leaders. They knew where the leaders were. They know even today what the leaders are doing and where they are. One of the reasons they haven't killed a lot of those leaders is they didn't want to start a war. I've been reading Bob Woodward's latest book that's called War, where he covers a lot of this period, and he said they were being very careful about the timing of when they'd go after the leaders, because if they just did it precipitously all at once, it might have put the whole Middle East into a wartime situation. Also, they've taken out enough leaders that I read recently that it's estimated it would take about 10 years to build back Hezbollah leadership, all things being equal. You can't just say the next guy steps up, the next guy steps up. That might have happened with Hamas, but Hezbollah was a much more organizationally structured organization. They were the biggest non-governmental army in the world, Hezbollah. And so taking out their leaders, it's not easy for them to rebuild that. That's what's leading to negotiations. That's what's leading to the parties talking now.
One last question.
Given what you just said about Hezbollah and the army, I was expecting a lot more from them, despite the fact that some of their leaders were eliminated. What happened with them? Why was it so fast?
Do you mean?
Oh, not Syria. I mean in Hezbollah.
Do you mean in response to the pager explosions?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought maybe you were going to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles winning the Super Bowl. We know each other, and she is a fan. I can't answer that. I think it's because they just weren't prepared for this. They didn't know what was going to happen. The reach and the extent of Israeli intelligence. They have a big facility in the Negev desert where what goes on there is nobody knows. It's just they practice what's called SIGINT intelligence, S-I-G-I-N-T, signal interception. They may know what we're doing at this moment. I don't know, but they are incredible with what they do. And what they revealed, as I said earlier, was what they knew they were safe in revealing because it was one and done. And they move on to other things. Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed having you here.